With a reputation for survival against the odds, courage and hardiness are the watchwords of the Uranisirta regulars. In this video, we're going to show you how to paint a Hearthkin warrior to a parade-ready standard in the scheme of the Uranisirta regulars. Now, as you can see here, we've already got a model painted up to battle ready, and if you'd like to see how we did that, you can check it out in a previous video. Now, the first thing we're going to do is a chunky highlight on that green armour using Lauren Forest, then an edge highlight using Strachan Green. After that, we'll move on to the undersuit, layering up the raised areas with Auric Flesh and highlighting with Krieg Khaki. So let's get some Lauren Forest here onto the palette. Going to add a touch of water to thin it down a little. Then roll my brush up to a nice point. Then we're going to apply that onto those green armour panels, and we're going to do quite a thick highlight for this. We're doing a chunky highlight to start with, as we're going to place a thinner edge highlight on the inside of this one in a minute. Next, we're going to use Strachan Green as an edge highlight for those armour panels. Take your time with this and be as neat as you can. Don't worry if you do make any mistakes, as you can just tidy back up again. With that highlight now done, we're going to use Auric Flesh to layer up the raised areas of that undersuit. We've thinned this down with quite a lot of water so that it just tints the surface of those raised areas. With those raised areas brightened up, we're now going to use Krieg Khaki to pick out some edges of that undersuit. Don't forget to do the belt loops as well. And with those highlights done, we're now going to move on to the next stages. So we're going to highlight the brown areas using Talon Sand, then bring those metallics back up using Stormhost Silver, and then apply Dawn Yellow to that blade to highlight that. So let's get some Talon Sand onto the palette. As usual, we're going to thin it down with water so that it's a smoother consistency. Once I've rolled my brush up to a nice point, we're going to pick out the edges of those brown areas. Next, we're going to use Stormhost Silver to brighten up all those metallics. Next, we're going to use Dawn Yellow to edge highlight the blade. Now that's done, we're going to move on to some other areas. So we're going to take Deathclaw Brown next and use that to highlight the visor and the screens. Then we'll be applying a spot highlight to those areas using Flayed One Flesh. Then we'll use Administratum Grey to highlight the grey gun casing. So let's get some Deathclaw Brown onto the palette here. And thin it down with some water. Making sure I've got a nice point on my brush. Then we're going to pick out the edges of those screens and that visor. So first we'll do the edges on the screen, then we'll move on to the visor. Next, we're going to use Flayed One Flesh as a spot highlight for all of those lighter brown areas. So that includes the screen and the visor again. So to do this, we're just applying a dot in the top corner. We're also going to do this on the lamp and the buttons on the other arm. Next, we're going to use Administratum Grey to edge highlight that grey gun casing. With that done, we're now going to move on to the base. For this, all we're going to do is dry brush using Flayed One Flesh. So I've got a small dry brush here, and I'm going to take a small amount of paint onto a paper towel. Then work off as much of that paint as possible, leaving just a small amount on the bristles. Then we're going to apply that onto the base. What we're doing here is moving it back and forth across the texture, and this will highlight the raised edges while leaving the shade in the recesses. With that dry brush done, all that's left to do is tidy up the rim of the base in the same colour as before. In this case, we use Steel Legion Drab. And now our Hearthkin warrior is finished, ready to march to war, refusing to countenance defeat or despair. So there's just a couple of things to remember when you're painting this miniature. When you're dry brushing, make sure you remove as much pigment off that brush as possible and build it up on the miniature in soft layers. Also, when you're edge highlighting, try and keep your brush up to a nice fine point and use the edge of your brush where possible. But don't worry, if you do make any mistakes, you can always tidy back up with the previous colour. Well, that's the end of the video. We hope you've had great fun watching and we hope you enjoy painting your own miniatures. We'll see you in the next one. Bye!